They laughed at the janitor, mocked his worn boots, snubbed him in elevators, forwarded memes behind his back. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't just cleaning floors, he was watching, listening, taking notes. And when the day finally came for the new CEO to introduce himself, it wasn't a man in a suit who walked into the boardroom. It was him, mop still in hand. What happens when the person everyone thought was beneath them holds the power to change everything? This isn't just a story about judgment. It's about quiet truth, respect, and the moment's silence speaks louder than titles. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as they warmed the air above the marble lobby, casting faint reflections on the freshly mopped floor. It was just past 7:30 a.m., and most of the building remained quiet except for the low hum of vending machines and the occasional mechanical sigh of the HVAC system cycling on. The janitor moved steadily across the tile, one hand on the mop handle, the other gripping a faded yellow caution sign that he'd reposition every few steps. His boots left small prints in the moisture before the mop swept them away again. They were old, creased at the ankles, stained with cleaner in time. His uniform was plain navy, with no name tag or company logo, just a patch where a name might have once been. His shoulders were broad but not stiff, and there was a calmness to the way he worked. Like someone used to being in the background, the spill had started near the corner vending machines. Someone's soda had burst open before the weekend and crept its way toward the elevator bank. He'd found it that morning congealed and sticky. Now, the mixture of disinfectant and citrus-scented soap filled the air as he worked from the edges inward. Careful not to leave streaks, the lobby doors slid open with a soft hiss, and two interns walked in with foam coffee cups and messenger bags slung carelessly over their shoulders. Both wore ID lanyards like trophies, fresh-faced and overdressed in comparison to the rest of the office. They were laughing about something, probably a meme or a weekend story until one of them stopped short just before the caution sign. "Careful," the janitor said without looking up, his voice low, steady. He shifted the mop slightly, creating a dry path to the elevators. The taller intern glanced down, wrinkling his nose slightly. The other smirked, eyes darting from the janitor's soaked boots to the utility cart parked nearby, stocked with spray bottles and folded rags. Doing that for a living, the taller one muttered as they stepped around him. The janitor didn't flinch. He just kept working. The mop glided over the floor in a rhythmic figurate, methodical, deliberate. He moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times. One of the interns snickered again as the elevator doors opened. Neither said thank you. The elevator closed with a soft chime behind them. Alone again, the janitor repositioned the caution sign and wrung out the mop into the gray bucket. He didn't rush. There were 3 more floors scheduled for him that morning, and then the executive hallway by 10 o'clock. He reached into his back pocket and unfolded a small, worn list, handwritten, checked off in neat, tiny lettering. He added a tick mark beside lobby spill. Above him, the security camera turned silently in its dome. No one paid much attention to it, but the janitor always knew where they were. He adjusted the mop handle and slowly moved toward the elevators. The doors opened again, this time revealing no one. He stepped in, alone with his cart dot, as the elevator began its quiet ascent. He looked at his reflection in the brushed steel walls, creased uniform, lines at the corners of his eyes, salt starting to overtake the black in his beard. His gaze lingered, unreadable, then dropped back to the cart. The elevator stopped on the 6th floor. He stepped out into a hallway that buzzed with fluorescent lights and the faint static of computers coming to life. An HR rep passed him in the hallway with barely a glance, her heels clicking a little too loudly on the tile. He reached the executive lounge and paused just outside the door. From inside came voices, low, confident, dismissive. Facilities was supposed to fix the coffee machine over the weekend. They never do. I think the janitor just moves it around and pretends it's fixed. More laughter. He pushed the door open without a word, wheeled his cart in, and began wiping the counter. The laughter stopped, but no one greeted him. One man stepped aside, coffee mug in hand, eyeing him with faint irritation as if he were a disruption. The janitor remained quiet, eyes focused on the coffee machine. He opened the back panel, adjusted a valve, and checked the wiring. No one. Noticed the way he paused for a half-second, considering a corroded terminal before closing it again with care. He finished the maintenance, wiped the machine down, and turned away. On the counter, someone had left behind an abandoned folder labeled Q4 Forecasts Internal Only. He didn't touch it. He just moved to the sink, rinsed a rag, and wrung it out slowly. Behind him, the conversation picked up again, but quieter now, like people realizing they might be overheard. The janitor returned the rag to his cart, gave one final look at the spotless counter, and wheeled the cart back into the hall. He walked down the corridor slowly, mop handle resting. Against his shoulder, like it belonged there, by the time he reached the elevator, no one remembered his name, which was exactly how he wanted it. On the 20th floor of the building, the one with the high ceilings and tinted windows that curved slightly with the glass there, was an office. No one entered. It sat at the far end of the executive corridor, past the assistant's desk, past the glass conference room where decisions were made behind frosted panels and half-shut blinds. The door to this office was heavy, framed in dark walnut and brushed brass. But it had no nameplate. Every other office had one. Dr. Singh, CFO, Clarissa Moore, VP of Strategy, even the assistant had her name in elegant lettering etched into clear acrylic. But this door had only a small trace where a plate had once been mounted, for empty screw holes and a faint discoloration on the wood where something had been removed. It didn't take long for people to start wondering in the first week of the quarter. It received a work order to set up a new laptop with administrative access. The machine was delivered, signed for by someone in facilities, and then vanished. HR confirmed that a new CEO had been appointed following the quiet departure of Gregory Leland, who had led the company through 5 tense fiscal years and one very public lawsuit. But no announcement was made, no welcome email, no all-hands meeting with a speech full of vision and words like synergy or agility. Just silence. Clarissa, the VP of Strategy, started telling people in the break room that she had seen someone in the office one late evening, lights on, blinds half drawn. He was tall, she said, or maybe just wearing boots. Others dismissed it. Probably the janitor cleaning again. Someone laughed. He's always up here poking around. Still, the office remained locked. Mail addressed to executive. Suite 2001 collected in the mailroom, but no one came to pick it up. A manager from accounting claimed he heard someone on the phone inside the office, deep voice. Calm, speaking in clipped sentences, but when he knocked to introduce himself, no one answered. The next day, the door was locked again. Facilities received no requests. Security had no record of a keycard entry, but a senior operations analyst swore she saw the conference phone in the locked room listed as active on a call sheet. It told her it was probably a glitch. The theories became more creative over time. One intern said the CEO was working remotely from Europe and kept the office locked to make it look like he was coming in any day now. Another insisted the new CEO was actually a woman, and she was testing how the staff behaved when they thought leadership wasn't watching. Like undercover boss, someone joked. Except less budget and more real consequences. By the end of the month, it had turned into something closer to a game. The assistants would leave notes on the office door, welcome whenever you arrive, or blink twice if you're in there. Once, someone taped a small mirror to the wall opposite the door, angled to catch a reflection through the frosted glass. It was gone by lunch. The silence from above didn't slow anything down. Marketing campaigns continued. Quarterly reports were prepared. Performance reviews were submitted. Everyone worked under the same assumptions they always had. Do your job, cover your bases, stay late when you're watched. And yet, the feeling grew. One Monday morning, the director of operations arrived early and noticed that a framed photograph in the consecutive hallway had been shifted half an inch. Not crooked, just moved. On Thursday, the coffee pot in the executive lounge had been cleaned and filled before anyone arrived, but no one admitted to doing it. A facilities request for a cracked floor tile was mysteriously resolved before the ticket reached the maintenance queue. It wasn't that people were scared, they were uncertain about who was in charge, about whether anyone really was, about whether the quiet presence, whoever they were, was watching. And still, the office door remained locked. No nameplate, no sound. Just a single brass doorknob polished faintly by use, and the feeling that behind it, someone already knew everything. The call came in just before 10. A clogged toilet on the 20th floor, overflowing. Maintenance was slow that morning, so the request had been rerouted to janitorial. By the time he reached the executive corridor, the air already carried the sour smell of bleach, old plumbing, and something heavier beneath. The janitor pushed the cart quietly down the hallway, wheels squeaking faintly with each turn. The hallway lights reflected off polished floors and modern art framed in glass. As he passed the assistant's desk, she barely looked up. Her phone was in one hand, a coffee mug in the other. She gestured vaguely down the hall. "It's gross," she muttered, still scrolling. "Try not to leave a mess." He nodded once and continued toward the private restroom tucked at the end of the corridor. The door was ajar, and the light inside cast an uneven glow onto the tile. A paper towel had been dropped just outside the threshold and left there. Inside, water had pooled across the floor, soaking the baseboards and reflecting the overhead, lights like a cracked mirror. He stepped in without hesitation. His boots, still damp from morning mop duty, made soft splashes. He shut the door behind him. The assistant waited until he was out of sight before raising her phone and snapping a quick photo of the janitor from behind. The caption read, "This is why we work from home. #executive privilege." Within seconds, it was sent to her group chat further down the hall. A manager rounded the corner in heels that clicked impatiently against the marble, her nose wrinkled at the sight of the wet floor sign, which the janitor had placed just outside the door. "Oh, come on," she muttered, pausing. "Every time we have clients, something's leaking or broken. What is this, a high school gym?" She looked at the closed bathroom door with disdain before turning on her heel and walking away. Heels echoing inside, the janitor worked quietly. He removed the excess paper towels, clogging the drain first, gloved hands steady. The plunger was worn but dependable, and with a few careful motions, the pressure in the pipe released with a deep gurgle. He adjusted the flush valve behind the tank, an older model, not standard, and noted the misalignment of the internal float. Something too subtle for anyone else to notice. He fixed it, wiped the casing, disinfected every surface as he knelt to scrub the floor where the water had spread. He noticed scuff marks near the baseboard. He paused. The tile was unbroken, but the wall trim showed signs of being recently shifted, subtle, but clear if you knew where to look. He ran his hand along the edge. Just wood and plaster. But perhaps not just that. Still on his knees, he pulled a small tool from the inner pouch of the cart and tapped gently. Hollow, then solid, then hollow again, he said. Nothing, made no notes. He simply filed it away in his mind. When he exited the restroom 15 minutes later, the assistant didn't look up. She was laughing at something on her phone. He paused just long enough to reposition the wet floor sign back onto the cart. The hallway was quiet again, sunlight slanting in through narrow windows along the wall. The executive floor never got busy, but it always felt full of noise that no one was allowed to acknowledge. He turned the cart toward the service elevator behind him. The assistant's phone buzzed. Another reply to her photo. Someone had added, "Is he still using a mop from 1992? Followed by a series of laughing emojis. She smirked and typed something back. Down the hall, a cleaning cart disappeared into the elevator. The doors shut, without a sound. Inside, the janitor leaned against the wall, arms folded, mop resting beside him. His expression didn't change. But in his pocket, he carried a slip of paper he'd found tucked behind the old plumbing handwritten notes, faded ink, and a signature. He didn't read it yet. There would be time. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor with their usual soft chime. Inside, 3 team leads stood huddled near the control panel, all mid-conversation, their badges swinging lightly from their lanyards. Their voices were hushed but urgent, the kind of talk that always involved budget slides, client complaints, or who might be up for promotion once Q2 ended. He stepped in quietly, mop handle resting in one hand, the other gripping the side of his cart. There was no nod of acknowledgement, no shift to make room. Just a flicker of eyes in his direction and a pause in conversation that hung unnaturally in the air. One of them, the youngest, leaned back slightly, as if trying to create space that wasn't there. Her perfume something citrusy and sharp tightened. Around her, like armor. The man in the center, tall with a pressed shirt and hair that never moved, reached across the buttons and pressed 17, even though he had already selected it. His thumb lingered there, as if affirming his right to the space. The janitor said nothing. He simply adjusted his grip on the mop and looked straight ahead, his expression neutral. The elevator resumed its climb. Seconds passed slowly. It wasn't that he took up much space, it was that his presence punctured the invisible boundary they had constructed for themselves. One, where casual hierarchy went unquestioned. They could joke about sales numbers, mock someone from HR, whisper about that analyst who cried in the break room, but not with him there. Not with the scent of ammonia and soap faintly rising from his cart. Not with the quiet reminder that someone had to scrub the baseboards and empty the bins they left overflowing at 16. The elevator slowed. "We'll just walk the rest," the woman with citrus perfume said abruptly, nudging the tall man's elbow. He looked confused for half a second, then caught on. "Yeah, good idea." The third man didn't say anything. He just followed. They exited in awkward unison, their shoes clicking quickly across the tile floor, their conversation picking back up only once the elevator doors had begun to close, as the gap narrowed. The last words floated through. "Smells like bleach," one of them muttered. The elevator resumed its climb. Alone again. He reached into the cart and pressed the button for the top floor. The mechanical hum returned, steady and indifferent. His face didn't change. If anything, it relaxed slightly. The silence in the elevator wasn't new. It had greeted him for weeks, not cold, just distant, polite in the way people are when they think their status gives them the right not to be bothered. As the elevator neared the 20th floor, he caught his reflection in the mirror-polished metal of the doors. His uniform was clean, but plain. There were faint lines on his cheeks that weren't there 10 years ago. His hands were calloused. Not from a lifetime of manual labor, but from weeks of choosing to do it. He adjusted the mop again. Arrived, he stepped out, wheels of the cart squeaking just once before hitting the thick carpet of the executive floor. The hallway was empty, the lights bright but softened by the frosted glass that lined each office. At the end of the corridor, the unnamed door remained locked, undisturbed. From another hallway, faint laughter echoed. The team leads, now out of sight, had resumed whatever conversation they'd paused. Their shoes clicked against the tile in perfect rhythm. He passed the assistant's desk. She didn't look up. Inside the janitor's closet, he slid the mop back into place, clicked the handle closed, and leaned against the shelf in silence. A faded newspaper clipping was pinned to the wall above the sink a lot at the edges. Dated 3 years ago, CEO steps down amid merger turbulence. Successor to be named. The name wasn't underlined, but he looked at it anyway, just for a second. Then he reached for the checklist, flipped the page to Monday, and crossed off. Elevator bay, -15 to 20, nothing else needed to be said. The loading bay smelled like damp concrete and cardboard, soaked faintly with the scent of engine oil and wet plastic. The rain had started just after noon, steady and indifferent, coating the delivery trucks in a thin sheen and turning the gravel beyond the dock into mud. The overhang above the bay provided just enough shelter to keep the floor dry in a perfect rectangle. He sat near the edge of it, knees bent, elbows resting on them, a steel thermos cupped between his hands. Steam rose slowly from the rim as he unscrewed the lid and took a sip. The coffee was cheap instant dark, bitter enough to bite the back of the throat, but it was warm, and at least it tasted like something real. Behind him, cardboard boxes were stacked in uneven towers along the wall. Some marked office supplies, others blank, just numbers and barcodes. A few had split at the corners, revealing bubble wrap and packing paper stuffed like insulation. The receiving area was quiet this time of day. The driver had come early. The next one wouldn't show until after 2. No one came here unless they had to. It wasn't cold exactly, but the air felt heavier near the floor. The kind of place where people might leave something, but not where they'd choose to stay. A radio crackled faintly from somewhere inside a maintenance frequency, someone asking about a broken air vent on 12. He didn't reply. It wasn't his floor. He took another sip, watching the rain blur the outlines of the alley beyond the gate. Thin streams trickled into a nearby drain, swirling with bits of leaves and dust. The silence was never total, but it was the kind that left space for thinking. He liked this part of the day. Not for what it was, but for what it wasn't. No whispers, no stares, no small talk disguised as power measuring. He reached into the side pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sandwich, wrapped in wax paper, white bread, folded over a slice of ham and mustard. He didn't eat it right away, just held it, letting the warmth of the thermos press into his side. From somewhere above, faint footsteps echoed on a metal grate. Someone walking across the sky bridge that connected the upper floors. Probably an intern. The footsteps didn't pause. No one looked down. He bit into the sandwich and chewed slowly, watching the rain flatten against the pavement. A truck passed on the nearby street, tires hissing through water. The motion sent a ripple through the puddle near his boots. He watched until it settled. The break room upstairs was full at this hour, microwaves humming, people arguing over someone, stealing yogurt or reheating fish. Managers talking in low voices. Lunch brought hierarchy with it, corner booths and rotating seats, where the newest people stood until someone motioned them in. He hadn't stepped into that break room in weeks, not since the first day when no one spoke, and a woman in a fitted blazer had asked, not unkindly, if he was lost. When he explained that he was just there to eat, she nodded once and went back to her conversation, shifting slightly so her shoulder turned away. So now, he took lunch here, where the only conversations were the occasional pigeons pacing the edge of the overhang or the clink of a soda can rolling under the recycling bin. He finished the sandwich, wiped his hands on a napkin, folded into fourths, and tucked the thermos back into the cart. Rain still fell, steady as ever. He waited a few more seconds before standing. He always waited until the full hour passed, whether there was work to return to or not. Something about keeping the shape of the day intact. He rolled the cart back. Through the double doors, his boots thudding softly against the rubber mat. As the door closed behind him, the sound of rain softened to a hushed dot upstairs. No one knew where he'd been. No one asked. No one noticed that the loading bay was dry, swept, and clean. No one noticed that the coffee machine worked again this morning, though no ticket had ever been filed. The building's internal systems operated quietly in the background, an invisible current of access logs, keycard entries, temperature controls, and motion sensors. Most employees never thought about it. Doors opened, lights came on, and rooms remained warm or cool depending on the settings buried deep in the management software. But in the back corner of the basement, 2 security technicians monitored these details. Every weekday, from a small room filled with screens and blinking status lights, it was one of those technicians, Eli, who first noticed the pattern. He was scrolling through routine door activity logs from the upper floors, checking for badge discrepancies, part of a weekly report due by noon. Most of it was uneventful. Executives tapping in at the usual times, cleaning staff logged near the restrooms and break rooms. A couple of minor anomalies, someone entering the finance suite 20 minutes early, but nothing that warranted escalation. Then he saw Janitorial, LVL 20 Executive Archive, access 6:52 a.m. Squinted at the screen. That room wasn't in regular use. In fact, it had been listed as storage pending reassignment since before the last renovation. The only access that morning had come from a badge linked to facilities ID number 7482, assigned to someone only listed in the directory as LSW, no last name filled in. The system flagged no error. The clearance was active, but Eli didn't remember anyone from Janitorial being granted access to an archive room on the top floor. He scrolled further. There were more entries, small ones, scattered over several. Weeks. Executive Conference Room A, before 7 a.m., electrical subroom behind legal logged once, then again 3 days later. Unused media room on floor 17, unlocked for precisely 7 minutes. None of them set off alarms. None exceeded clearance limits. Whoever had programmed the badge had either done so manually or through a security override. Eli leaned back in his chair. The other technician, Dana, walked in holding 2 paper cups from the lobby cafe. He pointed at the screen. "Look at this. Janitorial guy accessing closed rooms, quiet ones." She leaned over. "Facilities ID. Yeah. LSW, ever seen him?" Dana frowned. "Maybe the guy with the old mop cart. Doesn't talk much, probably. But he's been all over the place rooms. We don't even audit. Could be updating floor plans. Could be nothing," she said, sipping her coffee. "Still weird." Eli opened a secondary log window and copied the badge number into a query tool. He was halfway through checking the clearance origin when his supervisor, Patrick, stepped into the room. "What's going on?" Dana motioned to the screen. Eli found a janitor in some restricted spaces. Might be a clearance error. Patrick looked at the access trail and went quiet for a moment. Then he folded his arms. "Don't worry about that one." Eli blinked. "Wait, what?" "We're supposed to report unauthorized access." "It's not unauthorized," Patrick said. "The clearance was approved." "By who?" Patrick didn't answer right away. He looked between them, then down at the ID again. "Just leave it alone, it's covered." Dana glanced at Eli. "You mean it's internal, like ... corporate?" Patrick didn't confirm. He just gave a small nod, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the two technicians sat in silence for a moment. "That's above our pay grade," Dana muttered finally. Eli stared at the screen. The ID was still highlighted. The entries still blinking green. No red flags, no locked doors. The system had accepted them all. He minimized the log window and opened his report draft. After a long pause, he deleted the reference to facilities, ID number 7482, and typed "no anomalies" to report this cycle. Upstairs, the janitor walked through the main hallway with the same slow pace as always, cart trailing behind him. No one glanced up as he passed the reception desk, not even the guard on duty, but his keycard, still clipped to his belt, carried privileges no one expected him to have, and the building let him through every time. The halls on the 12th floor were unusually quiet by mid-afternoon. Most of HR had either gone to late lunch or slipped into small conference rooms for scheduled video calls. Fluorescent lights buzzed gently above, softened by the frosted glass. Partitions that divided each department into cells of polite efficiency. A few soft voices drifted from an open office down the corridor, laughter muffled by carpet and closed doors. The janitor moved through the hallway with a steady, unhurried pace. His cart was nowhere in sight. In his left hand, he carried a clipboard, not the kind issued by facilities for routine checklists, but one with printed diagrams and hand-drawn notes. The top page was already half filled with observations. Next, to each room number, he had written short codes, sometimes initials, sometimes just marks. He paused at the corner where HR's floor met the edge of legal, just before the hallway turned. On the wall beside the double glass doors of the HR suite, a whiteboard had been mounted at eye level, a collaborative space where the team tracked projects, team birthdays, and inside jokes scribbled in dry erase marker. There were arrows, stars, small drawings, and color-coded categories in various stages of being erased or redrawn. He stood in front of it, reading, not just glancing reading. His eyes moved slowly across the diagrams and dates, noting what had been circled, what had been smudged, and what was left untouched. A portion of the board listed upcoming interviews. Another marked internal audits. Deadlines were written in 3 colors, with initials beside them. Then he turned away sharply, not fast, but with intent, as if realizing he had been seen from the break room doorway. Megan watched him. She was the HR intern. 5 weeks into the program, still unsure which meetings required her input and which ones she was supposed to quietly observe. She held a paper cup of tea between both hands, mostly as a prop to make her look like she belonged there. The janitor's presence had caught her off guard. Not because he was out of place, everyone knew the janitor made his rounds, but because of the way he was studying the whiteboard. She stepped forward slightly. Hi. He looked over his shoulder. Calm, neutral, no surprise. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Just checking access panels." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, where a small metal grate ran along the wall, detail so unobtrusive Megan had never noticed it before. "Oh, right," she said. Unsure, he glanced back at the whiteboard. Once more, just briefly, then turned down the hallway and walked on, his clipboard tucked under his arm now, not as exposed. Megan watched him disappear around the corner, the soft scuff of his boots fading into the quiet. She stood there for a moment, still holding her tea, then turned toward the whiteboard. Nothing seemed unusual at first. The interviews were listed. Her own initials were there, next to a compliance training she had to help schedule. Someone had drawn a balloon dog next to Mike's birthday. Everything looked as it had that morning. But something felt odd. Not wrong, just noticed back at her desk. Megan opened her laptop and typed Ellis into the internal directory. Nothing. No last name, just facilities ward. Number, contact info, no team assignment. Later that evening, she mentioned it casually to her supervisor while they were walking out. I saw the janitor checking out our whiteboard. He seemed really focused on it. Her supervisor barely reacted. Ellis, he's harmless, quiet type. Do you know much about him? Not really. He's new, I think, from central facilities. The conversation drifted to other things, printer issues. Onboarding chaos, but Megan couldn't shake the image of him. Standing so still, so precise in the way he studied their board. It hadn't been curiosity. It had looked more like assessment. She never said anything more about it. But after that day, whenever she passed the whiteboard, she always looked over her shoulder just for a second, wondering if someone else was reading too. The email came in at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Subject line, rescheduling monthly all-team sync. The message was short and vaguely apologetic. Due to an executive visit on site this afternoon, we'll be postponing the 3 p.m. sync to a later date. Thanks for your flexibility. No explanation, no new time offered. Just a quick shift, the kind that happened occasionally but always sent a ripple through the floor. Executives almost never visited this early in the quarter. When they did, they usually announced themselves with catered lunches and standing meetings packed with nervous mid-level managers rehearsing their slide decks. But this time, no one saw anyone arrive. No cars pulling into the gated spots out front, no assistant with a clipboard ushering people into elevators, just the email and a calendar entry that quietly vanished by noon. The whispering started. Marketing speculated it was a surprise audit. Finance thought it might be about the regional merger that had been dragging on for months. HR, already bruised from recent staffing delays, hoped it wasn't another restructuring. But everyone agreed, someone important must be walking the halls, even if no one had seen them. On the 14th floor, the large glass conference room near the east-facing windows was reserved block-booked all day with the generic label. Internal strategy. The blinds were drawn tighter than usual, the chairs pushed neatly into rows. A fresh tray of water bottles sat at the center of the table. Not the usual cheap brand either, but the kind that came with black caps and barely their logos. Around 1 p.m., people passed the hallway hoping for a glimpse, but the room remained quiet. Inside, the janitor moved alone, a blue cloth in one hand, a small bottle of cleaner in the other. He worked in silence, wiping each chair arm and chrome leg, as if someone were inspecting them. He straightened the rows, replaced a single cracked coaster, and adjusted the blinds by one notch to reduce glare on the tabletop. No one asked him to be there. The cleaning team had already serviced the room the night before. There had been no spills, no trash left behind. Still, he wiped, straightened, adjusted. The windows fogged slightly from the humidity outside. Rain lingered on the horizon, but hadn't started yet. The building lights flickered once, barely noticeable. He made a note on a folded slip of paper and placed it inside his back pocket as he circled the table. He stopped near the head chair. He ran a finger lightly along the edge and paused. There, beneath the polished surface, was a scratch, faint, nearly invisible, but real. He noted it mentally, not for repair, but for context. The room's clock ticked in the silence, each second dragging just slightly at 1:17 p.m. A junior manager passed by, did a double take, and then kept walking. The janitor didn't. Look up by 2 p.m. A few employees wandered near the room again, exchanging puzzled glances. No one had entered. The doors had remained shut. Still, the lights were on, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. Someone swore they'd seen shadows moving inside earlier. Another insisted she'd heard someone talking on a call. But when the door was checked, it was empty. The meeting, as far as anyone could tell, never actually happened. At 3:04 p.m., 2 minutes after the original meeting was supposed to start. Lights out, blinds drawn, bottles still full. The janitor had long since left. His cart was back near the service elevator, the clipboard tucked beneath the cleaning supplies. His name badge had been turned inward. As always, upstairs, in the locked office with no nameplate, a document had been printed. No one saw it arrive. No one heard the printer. But it sat there, crisp, marked with the company letterhead and a short header. Observations, departmental preparedness, unofficial. Had no signature, but someone would read it, just not today. The spreadsheet had crashed again. Sarah muttered under her breath as she slammed her palm against the side of the desk, as if jostling the hardware might coax the data back into place. It didn't. The error message blinked on her monitor like it had a personal grudge. She minimized it, irritated, and turned her focus to the other screen still loading, still dragging under the weight of 6 pivot tables and a half-dozen charts. Her mouse wouldn't track properly either. A long sigh and clicked open the internal service portal. She scrolled past IT tickets, past badge access requests, and found the maintenance section. The list of recent issues was as long as any department's budget forecast. She skimmed for something relevant and opened a new request. Chair broken. Leans too far left, won't stay upright. That was all she wrote. She didn't include that the armrest also creaked, or that she'd been using the same faulty chair for nearly 2 weeks. Because no one seemed to take low-level requests seriously. She clicked Submit without a second thought and went back to trying to fix her formulas. When the janitor showed up 30 minutes later, she didn't even look up. He knocked lightly on the doorframe of her cubicle. She kept typing. "Chair issue?" he asked, voice calm and low. "Yeah," she said flatly, still staring at her screen. "It sinks when I lean, and it's noisy." She didn't say hello, didn't ask his name. She didn't even push back to give him space. He waited, then stepped forward anyway, kneeling beside the chair without asking. His tools made the soft sound of metal against plastic as he adjusted the seat mechanism. She sighed again, audibly this time, annoyed at the disruption even though she had asked for it. "You're not it, right?" she said, eyes still fixed on her screen. "Because that would be too convenient." "No," he said simply. "Facilities." "Of course," she said under her breath. He pressed the chair's height lever, tested the tension control, and flipped it gently on its side to check the base. Sarah clicked aggressively on her mouse, as if volume might increase its effectiveness. "Guys should really keep better chairs on standby," she muttered. "It's not like we're sitting around for fun." He didn't respond. He tightened something underneath the seats, small, deliberate movements, then stood, tested the tilt, and lowered the armrests until they clicked evenly into place. He wiped a small patch of dirt from the base with a cloth pulled from his pocket. "It should hold now," he said. "Cool," she said flatly, not looking up. He stood for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. By the time she finally glanced, over her shoulder, he was already gone. She blinked, almost surprised, as if she'd expected more. A form to sign, maybe? A note? A comment? Something. But there was nothing. The chair didn't lean anymore. She shifted her weight. It stayed firm beneath her. The creaking had stopped. The tilt was even. She frowned, suddenly uncertain. The fix had been quick, subtle, professional, more effort than she'd expected, more respect than she'd offered. She stared at the empty hallway beyond her cubicle for a few seconds, then shook her head and went back to her screen. Her mouse, as if in defiance, froze again. She filed a separate ticket to it. In the janitor's closet, on the lower level, the clipboard hung slightly off-center on its hook. He flipped the page, marked a single check next to the cubicle number, and added no comment. Some things didn't require one. The light above Tom's desk had been flickering for nearly 2 weeks. It wasn't a harsh strobe, just a slow, tired blink light. The bulb was making up its mind every few seconds whether to go out or hang on. Most of the people in accounting had grown used to ignoring it. They joked about it once or twice, then forgot. Work piled up. Deadlines approached. No one had time to care about a tired light over someone else's workspace. But Tom noticed. He always did. He was the kind of man who still printed out spreadsheets in the morning and color-coded them with highlighters. His desk had a small, framed photo of 2 teenage boys holding fishing rods beside a lake. The glass was cracked in the corner, but he'd never replaced it. He wore the same brown loafers every day, even though the heel on the right one was starting to give. He'd been in the department for over 15 years and liked things the way they were. The light bothered him, not because it made it harder to see, but because it meant something was being ignored. That morning, just after 10, the janitor appeared. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He rolled the curtain slowly, careful not to knock the edge of any desks, and stopped. Beside Tom's cubicle, from his belt, he unclipped a small stepladder, unfolded it silently, and began unscrewing the light fixture. Nobody looked up. Not from the far side of the open floor plan, not from the conference room where a manager was rehearsing a quarterly report. Even the woman at the nearest desk kept her earbuds in, scrolling through color palettes on her monitor like nothing was happening overhead. But Tom noticed he watched the janitor work in calm, practiced movements, removing the flickering bulb, checking the socket, replacing it with a fresh one from a thin white box in his pocket. The man's hands were steady, unhurried. The fixture cover was wiped clean with a cloth before being snapped back into place. Then the light changed. It didn't flicker. It glowed. Tom blinked at it once, then smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Hey," he said softly, turning his chair a few inches. "Thank you." The janitor paused. He didn't smile, but he nodded once, slowly. The kind of nod that meant it had been heard, received, and appreciated in its own quiet way. Then he folded the ladder, rolled the cart toward the next hallway, and disappeared down the corridor. Tom turned back to his desk. The new light illuminated the columns on his printed spreadsheets more clearly. The blue lines seemed crisper now. He reached into his drawer for a fresh highlighter and, without quite realizing it, sat a little straighter in his chair. The others didn't notice the light had changed. They didn't notice the janitor had come or gone, but Tom kept glancing up at it through the day. Just a little each time he marked a new line on his sheet, and each time he remembered the nod. Later that evening, as the office emptied out and monitors went dark one by one, Tom was the last to leave. He shut down his computer, stacked his pages, and tucked the cracked photo frame gently into his drawer. Then he looked up once more, just long enough to see the soft white light still holding steady. He didn't know the janitor's name, but he remembered the silence, the care, and the kind of gratitude that didn't need to be big to matter. The 11th floor had a strange silence that afternoon, not the usual hush of people focused on their screens, but a quiet that came after something had already happened. Desks were still occupied, phones still rang in muffled tones, but there was a tension in the air, like a conversation had ended too soon. Outside office 11 to 204, a nameplate had been removed. Just a pale square of adhesive residue was left behind, the outline still visible where a plaque had once been mounted. A rolling chair sat pushed neatly under the desk, the monitor dark. Files cleared, the janitor moved down the hallway slowly, pushing the cart with one hand. He knew the room had changed. He'd cleaned it the night before, after the termination email had gone out. The subject line had been vague, team update, but the subtext was always clear when someone was let go midweek. The employee had packed up quickly, a box under one arm, head down, no goodbyes. He stopped at the door and stepped in. The floor was clean, no spilled coffee, no crumbs, just a faint impression on the carpet where a footrest had been. He moved to the trash bin tucked under the desk and pulled it out slowly. Crumpled tissues, a used coffee pod, a torn sticky note, and something that didn't belong. A white envelope, perfectly sealed, untouched. He turned it over. No company markings, no return address. Just a name written in small, neat handwriting. Erica Lynn. He recognized the name. She'd worked in procurement, usually wore a blue sweater, and always greeted him with a small smile when she passed him. In the hall, not many people did that. He looked around. The hallway was still empty. He held the envelope for a moment, thumb brushing lightly over the edge. It hadn't been ripped, not even folded, just thrown away and opened. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and slipped it inside. Then he emptied the rest of the bin into the trash bag without another glance and returned the can to its place beneath the desk. He didn't read it. Not right away. There were protocols for things like this, and claimed personal items were to be handed to HR, sorted, logged, and eventually mailed. But this envelope didn't look like a form or a payslip. It wasn't in a corporate envelope. It looked like something left behind deliberately, or something someone else had thrown away on her behalf. By the time he made it to the service elevator, the envelope had settled against his chest. He pressed the button for the basement and leaned against the railing. The soft hum of the machinery muffled beneath the floor tiles. Downstairs, in the supply room, he removed his jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it on the shelf behind the door. He paused again, fingers resting over the inside pocket, but he didn't pull the envelope out. Not yet. Instead, he pulled the clipboard from the cart and flipped to the checklist for the 11th floor. One item remained unchecked: replace light diffuser 11204. He marked it complete. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the loading dock and turning the windows gold on the west side of the building. Inside, nothing had changed. The empty desk upstairs would be reassigned within weeks, maybe days. The name would be forgotten, but the envelope was real. It existed, and he had it. Some things didn't belong in the trash, even when someone else decided they should. The hallway outside the IT department had one of the older fixtures, an industrial-style light bolted into the corner of the ceiling, tucked just above the surveillance camera mounted at a diagonal angle. The bulb had begun to dim in recent days, flickering faintly every hour or so, casting the floor beneath it in a kind of pulse. Most people hadn't noticed, but the janitor had. He wheeled his cart into place just after 5, when most of the office had thinned out and the IT staff were winding down for the day. The hum of server racks buzzed faintly through the wall behind him, just audible through the vent panel near the floor. The hallway lights buzzed softly in sync. His steps were quiet, methodical. He opened the ladder with a single click, then climbed halfway up and unscrewed the faulty bulb with a steady hand. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than routine maintenance. He reached into the cart, retrieved a new bulb, and paused, his eyes scanning the small black security camera bolted into the wall beside the fixture. It was the older model, low profile, glass dome, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Most staff forgot it was even there. He didn't forget. With the new bulb in hand, he leaned slightly toward the camera, his other hand brushing along. The metal mount beneath it not overtly, not enough to draw attention if someone were watching in real time, but just enough to press against the edge of the bracket. The dome didn't move, but the lens behind it shifted slightly. The camera, now aimed 2 inches to the left of its original angle, would miss the corner of the corridor where 2 doors intersected. He tightened the bulb, adjusted the fixture, just enough to cast an even light, then stepped down the ladder. Inside the server room nearby, a rack monitor blinked to life. Daniel, one of the overnight IT staff, was eating a sandwich with his headphones half on when he noticed the shift. Camera feeds from every floor displayed in a grid. Nothing unusual until one panel blinked. The timestamp refreshed. Then again, he leaned forward. Camera for B Corridor 11 had changed its position. Daniel squinted. The frame looked nearly identical, but the overlap with the opposite hallway door had vanished. The old angle had included the edge of the IT room. Now, it showed only a clean stretch of hallway. He rewound the feed 30 seconds. There was no malfunction, no camera flicker, just a man in janitorial blues replacing a bulb. He watched the footage again. No tools, no ladder near the camera, no suspicious movement. The man had never looked at the lens. Daniel frowned, then clicked open a log file to cross-reference the camera movement. Nothing had been flagged. No access request. No error. He stared at the feed, then glanced back at the paused image of the janitor halfway up the ladder. He'd seen the man before. Quiet, always working the edges of the office, never drawing attention. He hesitated, then pulled up the security badge database and typed the number from the ID that had briefly flashed on the janitor's belt as he moved. Facilities ID number 7482. Clearance active. No notes, no anomalies. Daniel hovered over the log, debating whether to escalate. Then he closed the window and went back to his sandwich in the hallway. The janitor folded the ladder, returned it to the cart, and slowly made his way down the corridor. His hand rested on the clipboard for a moment, then moved past it. No notation needed. The light above now glowed steady. The camera remained quiet, its view altered by only a few degrees, enough to change what it could see, enough to change what it couldn't. Nothing more, nothing less. It started with a photo, grainy, slightly tilted, taken from behind a glass door on the 3rd floor. The janitor stood with his back to the camera, pushing a mop along the hallway floor. His posture slightly hunched, unaware of the lens. The lighting was bad, the resolution worse. But someone, probably an intern zoomed in, added a caption in bold white text, and pasted it into an email thread with the subject line, Office MVP. The caption read, "When you're the CEO of mopping." The email was meant as a joke, a harmless bit of office humor, shared between a few teammates on a slow Wednesday morning. It pinged into inboxes under the internal thread titled Break Room Laughs, a loosely moderated chain people used for memes, weekend recaps, and the occasional link to cat videos. At first, only 3 people responded. One added a string of laughing emojis. Another replied with, "Promotion incoming, head of sanitation strategy." The third pasted a gif of a man dramatically slipping on a wet floor by lunchtime. The thread had grown to 8 replies, then 16. The meme was forwarded to other departments: marketing, HR, even legal. Someone added a follow-up, a mock org chart with the janitor listed as chief executive of spills. A designer from the creative team threw together a fake ID badge with the janitor's face blurred and the name Moplord. Team leads chimed in. One added, "He works harder than half the execs TBH." A few others replied with facts and clapping emojis. Even people who rarely engaged in office banter replied with a lol or a thumbs dash up. No one questioned it, no one asked who took the photo, or whether the man had given permission. He was just the janitor, a fixture in the building, always present but never noticed. By the end of the day, the email had reached over 70 recipients. Downstairs, the janitor continued his rounds. He wasn't checking inboxes, he didn't have a company laptop. His ID badge allowed access to janitorial logs, supply ordering software, and the building maintenance dashboard. No Slack, no Teams, no memes. He pushed his cart past the second-floor lounge without pausing. The lights were dimmed. 2 employees inside were giggling over their phones. One of them looked up briefly as he passed, then down again. He didn't react. In the IT server room, Daniel noticed the subject line pop up on his secondary monitor. He hovered over it for a few seconds, hesitating, then clicked. He scrolled through the chain without responding. At the bottom, someone had added a quote beneath the image, "Clean today, lead tomorrow." It was meant to be funny. Daniel closed the thread. He didn't forward it. Upstairs, Tom, from accounting, didn't open the email at all. His inbox marked it as low importance. He ignored it, but most didn't. The joke lingered into Thursday, showing up on break room monitors and whispered in passing as people refilled their coffee cups. By Friday, someone had printed the fake ID and taped it on the door to the janitor's closet. It fluttered when the building's air conditioning kicked on. Swaying slightly like a flag, no one saluted. The janitor saw it the next morning during his early shift. He pulled it down, folded it once, and placed it neatly in the bottom drawer of the supply cabinet. He didn't report it. He didn't speak about it. He simply made a note on his clipboard. Closet door residue from tape, cleaned, and that was it. No reaction, no escalation, just the quiet routine of someone who saw everything and said nothing. The hallway outside conference room 3A was louder than usual for a Friday afternoon. The end-of-week sprint had everyone scrambling, teams finalizing reports, designers printing last-minute drafts. Between her shoulder and cheek, the office printer, an aging unit with a temperamental tray, had chosen this moment to stop working. A red blinking light warned of a paper jam and a queue of 10 jobs stacked up within minutes. Renee, the marketing lead, stood with her arms crossed. Her heels clicked impatiently on the laminate floor as she refreshed the printer status page on her laptop for the 3rd time. The screen still said error jam in tray 2. She groaned, audible and performative, glancing around for someone. "Blame! Of course, it's down again," she muttered. "Why is it always broken when I need it?" Around her, junior staff hovered, unsure whether to try fixing it or pretend to help. No one moved. Then the janitor appeared. No one had called him. He wasn't on any email about the sprint, but he moved down the hallway with his cart, paused by the crowd near the printer, and set his clipboard aside without a word. Renee barely looked up. "It's jammed again," she said, gesturing toward the machine like it had personally wronged her. He nodded once and crouched beside the base of the printer, opening the lower compartment with a small key from his belt. No hesitation, no struggle. Within seconds, he pulled out the crushed sheet causing the problem, smoothened a bent roller, and ran a test cycle. The printer chugged to life. Paper slid cleanly from the tray, and the blinking light turned green. He stepped back, wiped a faint smear of toner from the edge, and reached for the clipboard. Renee didn't thank him. She reached past him instead, grabbing the stack of newly printed colored drafts that were now spilling into the tray. "Finally," she said under her breath, already flipping through the pages as she walked away. The others followed. The hallway cleared in under a minute. He was left standing beside the machine, still humming now, perfectly functional. He checked the other trays, confirmed the toner level, and closed each compartment carefully before stepping away. The clipboard note read, "Cleared jam, replaced feeder paper, cleaned tray to censor no." One read the note. No one asked how the machine had been fixed so quickly after an entire team had struggled with it for over 20 minutes, back in the main office. The same group of employees continued preparing for their sprint presentation. Renee clicked through slides on the projector, holding the printed deck in one hand. She was calm now, focused. Her voice filled the room with polished urgency as she recited KPIs and client feedback. No mention of the printer. No mention of the person who fixed it. That moment, like many before it, was invisible. But the hallway camera logged his presence. The maintenance system logged the update. The janitor, after completing the printer repair, returned to the service corridor without a word. He paused in the break room long enough to refill the water in the mop bucket, then continued on toward the supply closet behind him. A fresh stack of paper stood ready for the next job. What was broken had been fixed, not by the person with a title, not by the team scrambling for a deadline, but by someone who didn't speak, didn't rush, and didn't need thanks. Just someone who noticed what others ignored, and who fixed things even when the people using them didn't think he was supposed to. The parking structure behind the office tower was mostly empty by 6:45 p.m. Most employees had already filtered out, their cars long gone, save for a few light stayers typing under desk lamps or waiting out traffic. The levels echoed with quiet, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of tires squealing against the exit ramp. Down on the third level, in the far corner beneath a cracked security camera no one had repaired in years, there was a single reserved parking space that stood out. The placard read, "Simply reserved executive use." Unlike the others, it had no name, no department code, and no car parked in it for most of the week. People speculated at first they thought it might belong to an investor. Then, someone from payroll insisted it was held for visiting board members. Another rumor claimed it was for the elusive new CEO who had still never made a public appearance, or sent a welcome memo since the company's restructuring 6 weeks prior. But every so often, the car would be there, nondescript, a late-model silver sedan with no company decal or vanity plate. Always spotless, always locked. No one ever saw who drove it. That Friday evening, as the last of the finance team left through the east exit, someone paused. Jason, a mid-level team lead, leaned over the stairwell rail and squinted. Across the lot, the janitor was walking slowly toward the reserved space, his jacket draped over one shoulder and a thermos swinging at his side. He looked tired but not rushed. Just steady. Jason watched as the man reached into his pocket, pulled out a key fob, and with a soft beep, the silver sedan unlocked. The headlights flickered once. Jason frowned. The janitor opened the driver's side door, placed his thermos inside, and sat behind the wheel. He didn't start the car immediately. He sat there for a moment, facing forward, as if letting the day settle before going anywhere. Jason hesitated, then stepped back from the railing. He didn't say anything to the group still in the stairwell. He didn't forward a message or ask aloud, "Did you guys see that?" But he saw it, and by Monday, the reserve spot was empty again. Inside the building, the janitor's schedule remained the same. Early arrivals found him mopping the lobby floors or cleaning fingerprints off the elevator buttons. He never spoke first, never lingered, but he always nodded politely if someone passed by. No one connected the car to him, not officially, but whispers began. A receptionist asked quietly if anyone knew his name. An assistant from HR recalled once seeing him carry a tablet, not a cleaning checklist, but a full device tucked between file folders. And a contractor from facilities muttered to his supervisor that the janitor had access to every mechanical room, including the locked ones with restricted badges. None of it was confirmed. Still, That single moment unfolding quietly in the dim of a parking garage started to shift something, just a little. The people who mocked him didn't stop. The interns still exchanged jokes. The meme was still passed around, but a few people began to pause before they spoke. A few began watching, because it wasn't just that he parked in a reserved spot, it was that no one told him he couldn't. Tom had always kept to himself. After 2 decades in accounting, he had mastered the art of quiet presence, attending meetings without speaking more than necessary, replying to emails with precision but little flourish, and eating lunch at his desk with the same sandwich every Tuesday and Thursday. He wasn't invisible, but he never drew attention either. That's why when he overheard something he shouldn't have, no one noticed him standing there. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Just before the quarterly finance review, the hallway outside the executive lounge was unusually busy. Caterers were setting up trays, a projector team was running cables, and a few assistants were hurriedly taping reserve signs on the conference room doors. Tom had come up early to deliver a printed copy of the updated spreadsheet packet, just in case the Wi-Fi cut out again like last month. He didn't expect to linger, but the elevator arrived with 2 men already inside. He recognized both, Martin from Strategic Partnerships and Lucas from Legal, both mid-executives, both known for loud phone calls and expensive watches. Didn't see Tom at first, or if they did, they didn't consider him important. As the elevator doors closed and the 3 of them ascended in silence, Lucas chuckled softly, arms folded. "I'm telling you, Martin," he said, "someone's poking around in expense reports." Martin raised an eyebrow. "You mean procurement? No facilities. I got a flagged invoice this morning for a basic bulb order, cross-checked against last month's usage. That never happens." Tom looked straight ahead, saying nothing. Martin shook his head. "That's ridiculous. Who's doing that?" Lucas paused. "It's not one of ours." Name on the internal note was, what was it? Something weird. V. Halden. "I think Halden, yeah. Doesn't ring a bell, but IT says the login is active. They have audit-level clearance." Martin scoffed. "Since when does some Halden get to review procurement?" Lucas shrugged. "That's what I'm saying. Something's off." The elevator, DINGED. Tom stepped off first, holding the spreadsheet packet under his arm. Neither of the men acknowledged him. They continued their conversation into the hallway, voices trailing behind him. Tom walked calmly to the back corridor, near the accounting office, and ducked into a side cubicle. He sat down and placed the spreadsheet on the desk, but didn't open it. His mind was focused now not on numbers, but names. V. Halden. It meant nothing at first, but something tugged at the edge of his memory. A label, maybe, or a signature. He'd seen somewhere unusual. He opened his inbox, quietly searching through old maintenance logs that accounting sometimes received as part of quarterly cost justifications. 10 minutes later, he found it. A digital PDF of facility access logs for January attached to a billing note about power usage on floors 10 through 14. Most of the logs had badge IDs, initials, or contractor numbers, but one entry near the bottom team for 12 AMs was labeled Access Verified V. Halden. No title, no department. Tom sat back in his chair. The badge ID associated with it was unlike the others, shorter, older format. The system hadn't flagged it because it still read as active, but it didn't match the newer employee database schema. It predated the last system update. He didn't say anything to his team, but from that day forward, he noticed more. The janitor with the clipboard outside HR, the camera angle near, legal's entrance suddenly shifted. The printer tray stopped before anyone arrived, and every time Tom saw the janitor again, quiet, focused, passing through unnoticed, he remembered that name, V. Halden. It wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't just a meme or a mystery. It was someone who had access, someone who saw everything. And suddenly, Tom wasn't so sure who really ran the building. It had already been a bad morning for Megan. She had woken up late after hitting snooze too many times, missed the early train, and arrived at the office with barely 5 minutes to spare before her department's status meeting. Her laptop refused to connect to the building Wi-Fi. Then her supervisor emailed her with a passive-aggressive reminder about submitting the monthly team metrics, something she'd already done last Friday. To top it off, the coffee machine on the 3rd floor had run out of oat milk again. So, she'd taken her paper cup black, extra hot, and not nearly sweet enough. Her heels clicked quickly down the hallway as she turned the corner near the east stairwell, trying to balance her phone in one hand while fumbling with the coffee in the other. Her inbox had 8 unread messages, and her thumb hovered over one from HR. When it happened, she collided hard with someone just outside the stairwell. Doors. The coffee flew. It splashed across her blouse, scalding through the fabric. The paper cup hit the floor, bouncing once and rolling toward the wall, leaving a trail of dripping brown behind it. "Are you kidding me?" she snapped without even looking up. The janitor had been emerging from the stairwell cart to the side, moving slowly and without noise. He looked down at her ruined shirt, then back up at her face. "I'm sorry," he said softly, already reaching into his pocket. Here, he handed her a napkin too. In fact, folded cleanly, pulled from the pouch near his belt. Megan grabbed them, more out of reflex than gratitude, and began blotting at the front of her blouse, face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Do you even watch where you're going?" The janitor didn't speak again. He stepped aside to give her room, gently moving his cart away from the wall, eyes down. She didn't wait for a response. She turned sharply, still muttering under her breath, and stormed off down the hallway, the scent of burnt coffee lingering behind her. By the time she reached her desk, her mood had only worsened. Her team hadn't waited for her at the meeting. The group notes had already been posted in Slack. She sat at her cubicle, blouse stained, laptop still stubborn about the Wi-Fi, and shot off a frustrated message to it about connectivity. Then, after a pause, she opened the building's facilities app and submitted a complaint. Obstructive cleaning during high-traffic morning hours. Possible safety hazard, she didn't name him, but the report was filed. Downstairs, the janitor quietly returned to the stairwell and picked up the coffee cup she had left behind. It had come to rest beside the baseboard near a faded corner of wall molding. He didn't comment on the stain or the complaint he knew would be filed. He had already seen the surveillance camera above the stairwell. Blinking steadily, the entire incident recorded in grainy black and white footage. He wiped the floor with practiced precision, dried the wall with a microfiber towel, and placed the cup in the bag of recyclables on his cart. Then he moved on. Later that afternoon, Megan passed him again, this time in the break room. He was fixing a flickering ceiling light. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance, but someone else did. Tom from accounting stood beside the vending machine, waiting for his change to clink into the tray. He watched the janitor reassemble the light fixture, watched the way his tools were organized in exact order along the cart tray, and how he paused just long enough to check the voltage reading on the fixture before sealing it up. Tom didn't say anything. Not yet, but Megan's mistake had been loud. Enough to echo, not just because of her words, but because of how calm he stayed. No one saw him file a report. No one saw him complain. But someone somewhere had taken note. The boardroom on the 17th floor was always quiet on Friday evenings. By 6:30 p.m., the lights were dimmed low, the window shades drawn halfway, and the hum of distant traffic filtered in through double-pane glass. All that remained was the faint scent of coffee, dry erase marker, and whatever catered lunch had been cleared hours ago. The janitor entered with a slow, measured step. His cart barely made a sound across the carpet. The room was littered with the afterthoughts of a long executive meeting. Half-full water bottles, napkins, an open laptop left on sleep mode, and a scattering of printed reports curled at the edges. The chairs were pushed back at odd angles, some still bearing jackets or notes scribbled on yellow pads. He moved through the space with a quiet familiarity, collecting the trash first, then wiping down the polished oak table with long, even strokes. He didn't rush. After gathering cups and tossing stray pens into the basket of forgotten supplies, he turned toward the large whiteboard mounted at the front of the room. It was covered in dense marker scroll projections, acronyms only relevant to those who had sat there hours earlier. He studied it. The chart in the center was a forecast model plotted revenue against onboarding costs, line graphs intersecting mid-year. Numbers were listed along the margins, some circled in green, others scratched out and rewritten in red. Along the bottom edge, a handwritten formula ran from left to right, ending in a predicted ROI marked by a neatly boxed figure. He stared at it for a moment longer. Then, without a word, He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper, a simple scrap. On it, the same formula had been written earlier in the week by him from memory. He held it up to compare. The decimal was off. Just one place, it would skew the margin prediction by nearly 7%. He looked at the board. Again, no initials, no signatures, but he recognized the handwriting. He'd seen it on memos left behind in legal, in notes left taped to monitors in marketing. Quietly, he picked up the whiteboard eraser. He wiped the formula clean, pausing at the corrected section, and rewrote it without fanfare. The handwriting was almost identical, but neater. Cleaner, no. One would notice at first. They would assume someone from the board had come back and made the correction late. They wouldn't think of the janitor, who wiped fingerprints from glass doors and refilled hand soap in the executive bathroom. He capped the marker and stepped back. The formula looked right now, balanced. The rest of the board he left untouched as he moved toward the far end of the room to adjust the chairs. A security camera blinked silently from the corner. It caught everything. Not that he minded. The recording would be archived, probably never reviewed unless something went wrong. He returned the room to its exact layout, teach chair pushed in, the window shade gently lowered, and the conference phone reset on its cradle. He doubled the lighting, turned off the presentation screen, and gave the carpet a brief pass with the compact vacuum before sliding his cart back into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. Upstairs, above the boardroom, a row of executive offices remained dark, unused for the week. The top floor nameplate still hadn't been replaced. No name, still no official introduction. But every week, that same boardroom was cleaned. Every week, those figures were checked. And every time something was wrong, quietly was fixed, not with a red pen, not in a quarterly memo, but by a man in worn work shoes, who never raised his voice, never asked for credit, and never missed a decimal. The receptionist, Andrea, sat behind the curved walnut desk with her usual poise eyes, following the flow of people as they funneled in through the glass doors, some nodding politely, others glued to their phones, few ever noticing her beyond a wave. Andrea had a habit of noticing things. It was part of the job. Names, faces, patterns. Who showed up late, who switched from briefcases to backpacks, who wore a new suit the week after a budget meeting. She noticed when someone from HR left crying, and when the third-floor microwave. She noticed who smiled when they entered and who never did. So when the janitor passed by her desk that morning, she didn't just glance, she watched. He came through the side entrance, as he always did, pushing the cart with its quiet wheels and neatly arranged supplies. He nodded to her like he always did, brief, respectful, and without delay. But this time, something different caught her eye. It wasn't his posture, or the way he moved, like he'd worked there for years. It was his wrist, the sleeve of his dark work jacket had shifted slightly as he pushed the cart, revealing a glimpse of a watch. Not flashy, not gold or diamond encrusted, but clearly something out of place. It was the way the face caught the light, subtle matte, finished with a clean black dial and silver casing. The leather band wasn't cracked like the kind you'd expect from a hardware store clearance shelf. The hands moved smoothly, not with the slight tick of a standard quartz. Automatic, Andrea guessed. She tilted her head slightly as he passed at it. They had shift schedules taped to carts and digital check-ins on the security system. But this was something different, something that said quiet money. Not wealth flaunted, but wealth kept private. Andrea knew watches. Her father had collected them vintage Hamiltons, a few Omegas, even a Breitling that never left the case. She'd grown up recognizing movements, bezels, dials. She knew enough to understand that a watch like the one she'd just seen didn't cost $50. It cost more than her monthly rent. She watched him disappear into the freight elevator without looking back a few minutes later. She buzzed in a delivery from the courier desk, answered a call about a parking validation, and greeted a vendor dropping off pastries for a conference. But her thoughts kept circling back. The janitor's watch. She opened a browser tab on her monitor and searched for automatic, minimalist, black dial, silver case. One looked close to close. The price tag was $3,200. She leaned back in her chair. The next time he passed by 20 minutes later, returning, he noticed her this time. "What's the janitor's name?" The older one with the, "Yeah, brought in a few weeks ago during the turnover. I just send in the maintenance logs. Haven't spoken to him." Andrea let it drop. But the next morning, when she handed off a guest badge to an incoming client, her eyes flicked automatically to the janitor again, now wiping down the glass door near the side entrance. Same watch, same quiet presence. For the first time, she wondered if she was watching a man who didn't belong on a cleaning crew. Not because he was out of place, but because he was exactly where he wanted to be. By Thursday morning, the usual rhythm of the office had shifted. Conversations that once filled the hallways were now hushed, fragmented, broken off mid-sentence when someone else entered the room. Coffee mugs clinked a little more quietly, and even the printers sounded louder than usual against the thick silence that had crept into every corner of the building. It had started with a forwarded email. The subject line read, "Upcoming departmental reviews, confidential." The message itself was brief vague language about restructuring, efficiency analysis, ongoing evaluations, and a phrase that seemed to echo across desks: organizational streamlining. No names, no lines, just enough ambiguity to send every department into quiet chaos. By mid-morning, teams were already speculating. Marketing wondered if the new interns were hired as replacements. Sales assumed the leadership was clearing house for outside talent. It said it was budget-driven. Finance whispered about underperforming units. HR didn't say anything at all. In the break room, the tension hung thick between microwaves and vending machines. Employees stood in pairs and trios, heads tilted slightly. Toward one another, voices lowered to a murmur. Phones were kept close. Some even left Slack open on second monitor's eyes, flicking to it between emails, waiting for clues. In the middle of all of this, the janitor moved without pause. He emptied bins. He cleaned the glass dividers in the open office pods. He refilled hand sanitizer stations. No one noticed him, and that was the point. Even in the storm of anxiety, he remained background noise, the hum beneath the panic, quiet, invisible. No. One questioned why he lingered near conference rooms longer than usual. No one noticed that he slowed his cleaning in the legal department when two managers locked the door for an unscheduled meeting. He heard phrases through the crack where the frame didn't sit flush, consolidate roles, outside counsel, and optional severance package. He made no move to react. He simply wiped the same door handle twice and moved on. In HR, someone was crying. The sound came through the frosted glass of an enclosed office, a muffled sob, followed by the unmistakable rustle of a paper packet. Being pushed across a desk, the janitor stood quietly outside, replacing the batteries in the wall clock, and said nothing. On the executive floor, tension was dressed better. People stood straighter, used corporate phrasing to disguise worry, but their eyes darted just the same. One VP carried a manila envelope into a corner office and didn't emerge for an hour. Another packed 2 framed photos into a laptop bag and walked out without saying goodbye. Still, no one looked at the janitor. No one wondered why he was in the boardroom, again, wiping the same surface he'd already cleaned the night before. No one saw him glance at the stack of printed performance summaries left on the table. He didn't touch them. He didn't need to. He had already memorized which teams had been under review, which metrics had fallen short, and which department. Heads had already been quietly removed from the internal directory. Downstairs, Andrea at reception noticed the mood change too. She greeted fewer smiles that day. Everyone seemed busy, preoccupied. Her inbox filled with calendar reschedules, canceled lunches, and meeting invites marked private. When the janitor passed her desk that afternoon, she looked again at the watch, same one, still understated, still expensive. She almost asked him something. But DIDN single quotes back in the main office, someone muttered, "Did you hear the rumor about floor 5? Another replied, "It's not just a rumor." The panic fed itself. People stayed later, stared longer at spreadsheets, worked harder in the final hours of the week as if a burst of effort might undo the months of metrics behind them. And through it all, the janitor continued his route. Steady. UN, BOTHERED, no one looked at him not as a risk, not as a threat, not as a person with a role in the decisions swirling around them, but as the week closed. He made a single stop outside HR, just long enough to drop a sealed envelope into the outgoing mail tray. No label, no return, only one word handwritten on the front: final. It was nearly midnight when the motion sensor lights flickered on outside the Human Resources suite. The janitor's figure appeared, as always unhurried and quiet, pushing a cart that rolled steadily across the marble tile. The entire building was asleep. Only the low mechanical hum of server fans and distant elevator systems echoed down the corridors. He paused at the glass doors of HR. The security badge at his waist flashed red, then green. A soft beep, the door clicked open. Inside, the air was still. Desks sat untouched, chairs tucked in. A framed quote on the wall read, "People are our greatest asset." He rolled his cart in. There was nothing unusual about him being there, at least on the surface. Janitorial access included every floor. No one questioned cleaning after hours. And the logs would show only that he entered, remained 42 minutes, and exited at 12:17 a.m. The cameras showed him refilling paper in the copier, wiping down counters, spraying the break room sink, and vacuuming beneath chairs. But he also stopped at a filing cabinet near the back wall, not the one most used for onboarding packets or time-off forms. This one was lower, older, almost forgotten. It was unlocked. He knelt beside it, scanning folders without pulling them fully free. Just enough to read the tabs, he paused at a file labeled Retention Protocol. Tier C, he read, his eyes narrowed slightly. Then he stood and returned the folder untouched. Across the room, the corner desk belonging to Director Elaine Chambers was left neat, as usual. Her computer was off. Her inbox light blinked red. He reached into his cart knot for cleaner, not for a rag, but for a small envelope nearly identical to the one he had dropped outside HR the day before. He placed it beneath her keyboard. Then he straightened the keyboard and turned slightly to adjust the ergonomic chair back into place. When he looked this way, the room looked exactly as it had when he entered. The next morning, something shifted at 8:32 a.m. 3 people entered HR2 from compliance and 1 from legal. Their badges were scanned, but they didn't log into any visible terminals. They requested an office. Chambers wasn't at her desk by 10 a.m. A departmental email announced a temporary leadership reassignment in HR. No reasons, no timeline. Chambers' name was removed from internal contacts by 11:15. A junior manager named Corey Jensen was listed as interim. No one in the broader office was told why, but rumors spread quickly. That an audit had been quietly triggered, that discrepancies were found in termination paperwork, that some employees had been quietly dropped months before the restructure talks had even begun. Some of those documents, it was whispered, bore forged dates. A few had even disappeared. Someone joked that the HR director got HRD. People laughed but uneasily, down in reception. Andrea received a visitor badge request marked Corporate Ethics Oversight. That department only surfaced in crises. At 2 p.m., a closed-door meeting began between legal and a board representative, and still, the janitor moved quietly through the halls. He mopped the floors outside marketing. He collected recycling bins. From accounting, he tightened a loose cabinet hinge in it. No one asked him anything. No one connected him to what had happened upstairs, except Andrea. She watched him that afternoon with a more focused curiosity. He wasn't reacting, wasn't lingering near the HR floor, wasn't checking his watch. He simply continued his route. Unnoticed. But when he stopped to adjust a flickering light in the hallway leading toward executive offices, Andrea noticed something strange. His badge, like hers, had been updated overnight. She saw the timestamp. As it flicked briefly on the screen when he swiped it, it was refreshed at 4:03. A.M. only. Corporate security had access to make that change. She didn't say anything. Just watched him return his badge to his belt clip and disappear again into the elevator. Later that evening, the HR suite remained locked. A new digital keypad had been installed, and the envelope beneath Elaine Chambers' keyboard gone. Only the janitor knew who took it. Megan wasn't supposed to be in the payroll folder. She'd only gone into the restricted drive because her friend, Alice in Finance, had left the tab open after their lunch and conference room. Be it had been an innocent oversight, one Megan wouldn't usually act on, but the label, Executive Comp FYTD, caught her eye before the screen dimmed, and curiosity fueled by office tension and a general sense of restlessness. Got the better of her, she tapped the mouse to wake the screen, then glanced at the hallway to make sure no one was watching. The building had been quiet all week, unusually so. Even Alice's desk was empty. She'd stepped out to take a personal call. The spreadsheet was open, rows of names, salaries that made Megan's stomach flip, bonuses in 6 figures, stock options, internal IDs, titles, all of it arranged neatly, as if no one had intended to keep it secret at all. She scrolled slowly, reading names she'd only seen on corner office doors and internal memos. Some were listed as senior strategy oversight, others under cryptic labels like executive advisory, confidential, and then, just as she prepared to close it and walk away, a name stopped her. It wasn't the name itself that froze her, it was the face that came with it, unbidden from some tucked-away corner of her memory. The name on the sheet, David K. Ellis. Title, Strategic Executive, Internal Operations, Acting Compensation, $1.2 million annually, plus equity. She stared at the name, then stared again. David K. Ellis. She didn't know any Ellis in the executive wing. None of the corner office nameplates had changed recently. She would have remembered she was the intern who updated the internal floor map after all. She sent meeting invites. She monitored the guest badge log. She had literally rearranged the roster on their website last month. She had never met a David Ellis. But her mind betrayed her with an image she didn't ask for. A man in worn boots, a mop handle gripped in one hand. A quiet nod as he passed her desk. A moment weeks ago when she had bumped into him near the water cooler and spilled coffee on her blazer. She had snapped at him, walked away before he could even speak. The janitor, he had apologized, handed her a napkin, then walked away without waiting for thanks, and now she could not unsee it. She stared at the screen again. The name, the salary, the ID number, the title that sounded made up but far too expensive to be fake. She sat back in Alice's chair, suddenly aware that her palms were sweaty. She scrolled further, but nothing else made her pause. No other face popped into her head the way his did. She kept returning to the Lynn David K. Ellis. What kind of executive had no office, no assistant, no calendar invites? Unless he didn't need one, unless he was watching something more. Then just the trash bins and light bulbs. Alice returned to her desk with a quiet sorry that took forever. Megan snapped the browser shut and stood quickly. "You okay?" Alice asked, frowning. "Yeah," Megan said. "Just remembered something I forgot to send out." She returned to her own desk, but couldn't focus. All day, she found herself watching for him. She checked the lobby cameras from her HR intern, access nothing. She stood outside the freight elevator longer than necessary. Still nothing. It wasn't until just after 6 p.m., when most of the office had cleared out, that she saw him. Walking down the east corridor, clipboard in hand, same faded jacket, same careful gait. He paused at the vending machine, inserted coins, waited as a packet of almonds dropped with a soft thud, and then he turned. Their eyes met across the hallway. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, just nodded once, calm as always. Megan didn't move, she just stared, and the only thing she could think was how many others knew. How long had he been watching all of them, and what else had he seen? The email came late Thursday afternoon. Subject line, CEO, introduction, mandatory attendance. No explanation, no itinerary, just a block on everyone's calendar for 9 a.m. Friday in the 10th floor boardroom. Confusion rippled across departments. Some thought it was a mistake. Others whispered that the company had finally hired the replacement for the last CEO, who resigned 3 months ago without ever publicly addressing the staff. Managers instructed teams to arrive on time. HR sent a short note encouraging professional dress. Even the interns were told not to be late. People buzzed about it all the way into the evening. Finally, the veil would lift. The nameplate on the executive office had been empty too long. And whoever this new CEO was, he had kept the lowest profile imaginable. Friday morning arrived with nervous energy. Coffee lines were longer. People wore jackets they hadn't touched in weeks. Ties reappeared. Laptops were stowed away in favor of company notebooks in case there was a Q&A session. Speculation ran wild. Some expected a consultant type, others were sure it was a woman, based on the silence. One guy insisted it was someone from Europe. No one agreed on anything except that it would be someone unfamiliar, Someone who would walk in through the back door, escorted by legal or security, or both. By 8:58, the boardroom was packed. Folding chairs had been added against the back wall to accommodate the overflow. Team leads sat in the front row. Directors positioned themselves just off to the sides, murmuring last guesses. Someone whispered, "He'll come in through the double doors in the back." Everyone turned to look, but the doors remained closed. At 9:03, the room shifted. Not from the expected entrance, but because someone had come in through the side service door. He wore dark work pants and a faded utility jacket. He had a cart with cleaning supplies. A mop handle stuck out the side. His name badge was clipped casually at his waist. Some chuckled softly. A few groaned. One whispered seriously, "Facilities picked the worst time to clean." He moved without urgency, pushing the cart toward the back of the room. Then paused. Everyone turned back toward the main doors again. Still waiting. Then he spoke. "I won't take up too much of your time," he said, his voice calm, low but clear. "I'm David Ellis, acting CEO." There was a pause, long enough that some thought it might be a joke. Someone laughed, short, confused, but he didn't smile. Instead, he took off the jacket. Underneath was a collared shirt, crisp and black, tucked neatly at the waist. He reached into the side of the cart and pulled out a folder thicker than expected, set it on the table. No one moved. "Before you ask," he said, "yes, I've been here a while, long enough to observe, long enough to understand the culture we've allowed to grow." He looked directly at the front row, watched people cut corners, dismiss others without looking up, ignore names, laugh at titles. "I've seen kindness too rare, but real, and I've taken notes on all of it." Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. A director cleared her throat. He opened the folder and removed a thin stack of printed pages. "In this packet," he said, "you'll find a reorganization draft. It includes revised leadership roles, departmental evaluations, and adjustments to our internal reporting systems. These aren't suggestions. They're already in motion." No one laughed now. He turned slightly to face the side of the room. "To those who showed up, did the work, treated people with respect, thank you. You've already shaped what's coming next. You just didn't know I was watching." The silence was absolute, and for those who couldn't be bothered to look. "Passed a mop," he said. "Your behavior told me everything I needed to know." With that, he turned the cart slightly and walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back one last time. "Next week," he said, "we begin again. I suggest you show up ready." And then he left, leaving behind a room filled with people who suddenly didn't know what their titles meant anymore. For a long moment, no one moved. The room was still thick with disbelief. After the janitor, now revealed to be the acting CEO, walked out of the boardroom, people remained seated, stunned, some blinking as though they hadn't heard him right. Others exchanged confused, almost embarrassed glances. One manager stood, walked toward the folder he had left on the table, and quietly opened it. Inside were copies of the reorganization chart, names highlighted, divisions realigned. Every page signed at the bottom, Ellis K. Ward. That afternoon, a follow-up email arrived. No graphics, no corporate logo, no formal tone, just a plain text message from a new internal address, executive.admin@ewcorp.com. It read, "Informal session, 6 p.m. break room, attendance optional." By 5:45 p.m., more than half the staff had gathered in the break room, some standing, others crammed onto stools and window ledges. The coffee machines had been restocked. The vending machine lights glowed in the corner. It wasn't formal. It wasn't catered. It was just quiet, except for the low murmur of disbelief. At 6:02, the side door opened. He entered, not in a suit, not with a presentation, but just as they'd seen him dozens of times before. Same boots, same walk, a clipboard in hand, but this time, nothing written on it. He stood near the microwave, not elevated, not behind a podium, just standing. And then, with no microphone, no fanfare, he began to speak. "My name is Ellis Ward," he said simply. "I started here 6 weeks ago. You've seen me, but you haven't seen me." Some people looked away, others leaned in. "I've been working in this building for 42 days. I've eaten in the loading bay. I've unclogged the same toilet. 3 times I've walked every hallway, fixed flickering lights, and picked up lunch receipts from the executive floor. Some of you called me sir. Some of you didn't look at me at all. He paused. I didn't do this as a stunt. I did it because culture isn't what's written on posters. It's what happens when no one's watching. And for 6 weeks, I watched. A nervous cough came from the back of the room. Ellis continued. Here's what I learned. This company is full of smart, capable people. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that smart doesn't mean better, that a title isn't a free pass to dismiss others, that power without humility corrodes everything it touches. He looked at a few familiar faces. Megan, who flushed slightly and stared at her shoes. Tom, who gave a small nod. Even Andrea, the receptionist, who had started connecting the dots. Days earlier, met his eyes with quiet understanding. I wasn't testing anyone, he added. I wasn't waiting to catch people off guard. I just needed to know who I could trust, not with numbers, but with people, with choices, with the moments that don't make it into reports. He turned slightly toward the vending machine, tapping it once, casually, like someone who'd spent time fixing it. This place is going to change, he said, but not with press releases. It'll change when we stop stepping over each other, when we stop laughing at the wrong people, when we remember that every role matters because every person does. Someone near the back muttered, "You could have just sent a memo." Ellis looked toward them and, without missing a beat, replied, "And if I had, half of you wouldn't have read it. But you watched the janitor. You just didn't know you were being seen back." He let that sit. Then he turned toward the exit. Before leaving, he added, "There's more to come, but tonight, get some rest. Monday's going to be different." He walked out, and this time when he passed through the halls, people didn't just move out of his way. They watched him quietly, fully, for the first time. The silence was no longer awkward. It was weighted. It pressed against the glass walls of the boardroom and hung thick over the gray carpet like humidity that wouldn't lift. No one reached for their phones. No one whispered. The laughter that had bubbled up earlier when the janitor had first walked in with his mop was now a memory no one wanted to claim. Megan sat near the back, stiff in her chair, one hand folded tightly over the other in her lap. Her blazer sleeve still bore a faint ring of coffee from the day she had bumped into Hemless Ward, the man she had yelled at for being in her way. She hadn't apologized, hadn't even looked back. Now she couldn't lift her eyes from the floor. Across the room, the team lead's confident only minutes ago exchanged hesitant glances. Jordan, who had once called Ellis Maintenance Ghost, in a Slack thread, now sat unnaturally straight, blinking too much. Carly, who had laughed the hardest when the mop meme circulated, stared at the edge of the conference table like it might disappear if she focused hard enough. The interns, clustered near the doorway, had gone completely still. No more sideways jokes, no nudges or snickering, just pale, uncomfortable expressions and a growing realization that everything they thought they understood about the office had just been turned upside down. No, one knew where to look. Eye contact had become radioactive dot at the center of it all. Ellis stood still. He wasn't angry. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't called anyone out by name. That somehow made it worse. His calm had stripped the room of its defenses. He didn't scold, he didn't smirk. He simply told the truth and left it. In the air, with no cushion to soften the landing, the discomfort wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exposure. One by one, memories began to surface. Comments made in hallways, rolled eyes in elevators. The way people rushed past him in the lobby, the smirks, the long silences when he entered the lunchroom, the way no one had ever said his name out loud. And now they knew. He had seen it all. He had seen more than any spreadsheet could measure. Not just how people performed under pressure, but how they treated those they didn't think mattered. That was the part that stung. That was the part that left a red flush creeping across necks and cheeks and ears. He had watched how they behaved when no one was looking, except he was. A junior staffer near the back shifted uncomfortably and whispered, "Do you think he's serious?" But no one responded. No one wanted to admit they weren't sure. Tom, the middle-aged accountant who had once thanked the janitor for fixing his light, was the only one who seemed at ease. He stood quietly near the wall, his expression unreadable but not shaken. He had looked the man in the eye before, had spoken to him like a person. Now, he simply waited, hands folded, gaze steady, but most others sat frozen because they didn't know what came next. Would there be consequences? Would names be named? Would their comments in private group chats somehow end up in a meeting memo? Ellis had said there would be changes, that Monday would be different. What did that mean? Sarah, from marketing, reached for her phone, then stopped herself. No one wanted to be seen typing now, not after what had just happened, not after realizing how little they knew about who watched what and when. The truth was plain now, hanging in the room like smoke after a fire. They had all assumed power looked a certain way. They had believed authority needed a corner office, a suit, a badge with a gold stripe, but Ellis had never needed to announce himself. He had never needed to interrupt anyone. He had let them talk, and now that they knew who had been listening, it was suddenly too quiet to breathe. The following Monday, the office opened just as it always had, lights flickering on at dawn, elevator chimes echoing in the empty lobby. The faint hum of coffee brewing behind glass doors, but something felt different. A taut stillness lingered. In the air, conversations were shorter. Laughter was quiet, cautious. People nodded more, smiled less. At exactly 9 a.m., an internal message landed in every inbox. Subject: staff realignment, phase 1, no fanfare, no bullet points. Just a list. The first name was David Glenn, Director of Operations. The second was Rachel Wu, Team Lead, Marketing Analytics. The list contained 5 names in total, all terminated, effective immediately. The notice was direct, unsigned, and provided no space for speculation. Their access badges were already deactivated, their email credentials revoked. Security accompanied them to collect personal items. No ceremony, no speeches, just quiet departures and tightly packed boxes. In the boardroom, Ellis Ward stood beside a whiteboard with nothing on it. No charts, no graphs, no slides. Only a slim folder tucked under his arm. The remaining department heads gathered slowly, eyes down, notepads in hand. No one was late. He waited until the last seat was filled before speaking. "I understand this is unsettling," he said, his tone steady. "I also understand that clarity matters more than comfort." No one moved. The individuals removed today were not let go because of numbers. They weren't dismissed because of profit margins or team performance. He opened the folder. They were removed because they used power as protection, because they humiliated junior staff, because they retaliated when challenged, because they treated others like problems to manage instead of people to support. He didn't raise his voice. No second chances when there were none given. A few heads lifted, but most remained lowered. Ellis continued, pacing slowly, not theatrically. "I've READ exit interviews. Listened to voicemail complaints that were never returned. I've reviewed Slack channels that no one thought were being archived. I've seen enough to know this isn't about performance, it's about culture." One manager cleared his throat to ask a question, but stopped when Ellis held up a hand knot to silence. "But to wait. There will be time for dialogue," Ellis said, "but not until we've dealt with silence. And silence has protected the wrong people here for too long." He walked to the whiteboard and wrote one word: standard. "This is our new baseline," he said. "Not perfection, not fear, just basic dignity, respect upward, downward, sideways. It applies to everyone, and it's not negotiable." He capped the marker and turned back. "If you think what's happening is about cleaning house, you're mistaken. It's about rebuilding one." Attention passed through the room, not panic, but reckoning. Many had known what had been happening. Some had participated, others had looked away. Very few had said anything. And now, the absence of action had become a liability. Outside the boardroom, the ripple effects began immediately. Sarah from HR took a long look at her compliance inbox and quietly began forwarding old complaints to a new folder marked Review Ward. Megan, now quieter than she had been in weeks, spent the morning composing an email she never thought she'd write. It began, "I owe you an apology." Tom, who had been through more than one reorganization in his time, made a small adjustment. To his morning routine, he greeted the receptionist with her name. He held the door for the custodial staff, not out of fear, but because, somehow, it had become the most obvious thing to do. The first termination didn't create chaos, it created awareness. Ellis never raised his voice, never pointed fingers. He didn't need to. He just read the names out loud, calmly, like someone who had seen enough. It was a quiet Wednesday when Ellis arrived early, as he always had, only this time he wasn't holding a mop or a clipboard. He carried a simple, battered manila folder creases down the spine, corners worn soft from handling. He entered the HR floor through the side door, the one usually meant for maintenance access. No one stopped him. By the time the leadership team had gathered in the small conference room, Ellis was already seated at the far end of the table. No title placard. In front of him, no assistant at his side, just the folder. He placed it on the table with care. No urgency. No dramatics. "This," he said, tapping the folder once, "is what you missed." He began laying out the contents slowly. Each sheet was creased or wrinkled. Some bore coffee stains. Some had been torn open, then discarded. A few were still, sealed edges yellowed with time. The first was a termination letter dated 6 months prior, addressed to a mid-level analyst named Peter Vaughn. His work had been adequate, the letter said, but his attitude toward authority had been flagged as combative. Vaughn's only crime had been reporting a team lead for harassment. The team lead, incidentally, had resigned 2 weeks ago. Just ahead of the restructuring, Announcement.Ellis slid the letter across the table toward the new interim head of HR. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The second item was a printed email, never responded to, from a facilities assistant named Carla. It outlined maintenance issues affecting disabled access on 3 floors. It had been marked low priority and then deleted. Third was a typed note, anonymous but clear. It described racial slurs whispered in the accounting department targeting an intern. It had been placed in the HR complaint bin. It had never been logged. Each item Ellis placed on the table came with no commentary, only the sentence, "This is what you missed." He pulled out a fourth handwritten feedback form from the suggestion box on the mezzanine. It was short. "We don't feel safe speaking up," signed only with the initials KMTHE. Room remained silent, shifting chairs, a cough, the slow realization that this wasn't a presentation. It was a reckoning. "These were not hard to find," Ellis said finally. "They were not encrypted, sealed, or protected. They were simply thrown away. Literally." He tapped the folder again. "I pulled every one of these out of the trash." Some of the managers exchanged glances, others stared straight ahead. "These are not data points," he continued. "They are people, voices. And you didn't just ignore them, you buried them." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "There's a strange kind of honesty in what gets thrown away. The things we choose not to deal with say more than the things we say out loud." Tom, seated near the door, glanced at the table and noticed one more sealed envelope. Its paper was different than still unopened. Ellis picked it up and held it in the air. "This," he said, was addressed to the board. It never made it. He didn't open it. He simply placed it at the center of the table on top of the rest. A silent stack of what had gone unseen. "I've spent weeks being invisible," he said. "Now I know I wasn't the only one." There was no need to raise his voice. No slides. No bullet points, just paper. Evidence. Memory. He stood up. "These are not just failures in process. They're failures in priority, and I don't plan on repeating them." He didn't ask if they understood. He walked out, leaving behind a table, no longer used for scheduling, but for facing what had been discarded. The hallway to the executive floor was quiet, carpet muffling every step. Sarah paused outside the door marked simply with Office 17. No name, no title, just frosted glass and silence behind it. She checked her reflection once in the polished brass handle, smoothed the front of her blouse, then knocked. There was a pause before she heard the soft come in. She opened the door slowly. The office wasn't what she had expected. No mahogany desk, no leather chairs, just a clean, spare space with large windows. A narrow desk with a notebook and pen, and Ellis Ward seated in a simple chair. Looking at a document, he slid to the side when she entered. He didn't stand. He just looked up and waited. She began, clearing her throat. "Etha, thank you for letting me in." He nodded slightly, no expression. No words yet. Sarah stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit, though the chair across from him was empty. She stood, hands clasped in front of her. The quiet inside the room was different from the hush of the hallway. It had weight. She knew he wasn't going to interrupt her. He was going to let her speak? "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about that day when I filed the complaint and you came. I was rude to you." She looked down at her shoes, then back at him. "Didn't know who you were, but I also didn't care who you were." Still, he said nothing, just listened. It was the same stillness he had carried as a janitor. Observing, remembering, Sarah took a breath. "When you fixed the issue, you didn't even say anything. You just did it and left. And I went back to my meeting like it didn't matter." She moved a step closer. "I'm not proud of how I acted. I think, at the time, I thought that kind of behavior didn't mean anything. That small disrespect didn't count unless someone important saw it. But you did. And now, I realized those moments weren't small to the people on the receiving end of them." She gestured toward the window behind him. "This place is changing because you paid attention to the things we didn't." Finally, Ellis spoke. "Why now?" he asked, his voice even unreadable. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Because I needed to say it before it became convenient, before others started apologizing just to keep their jobs." That answer hung in the room for a moment. "I know I can't undo what I said," she continued, voice quieter. "But I wanted to come here not to explain, just to acknowledge it, and to say, I'm sorry." Ellis nodded once. Then he stood. He walked to a small shelf behind his desk and placed a pen down beside a stack of notes. "You're not the only one who's had to rethink things," he said. She watched him, unsure what that meant, whether it was forgiveness or something else. "I appreciate the apology," he said finally, "but I don't forget." Sarah nodded. "I don't expect you to." He didn't ask her to leave. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply returned to his chair and resumed reviewing the document on his desk. Sarah lingered for another second, then turned and opened the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, the silence followed her. But it was different now. It wasn't avoidance or fear. It was the weight of clarity. He had listened, but he wouldn't erase what had happened. And maybe that, she realized, was the point. The memo arrived just after lunch, slid into inboxes across the building with no subject line flourish. No executive header, just the company letterhead, and for short paragraphs, it was concise, almost plain. But it changed everything. Every department, it read, would now be required to rotate one staff member each week into a shadowing assignment, spending 5 full workdays, alongside someone in a role considered operational support that included janitorial staff, cafeteria workers, shipping, reception, IT troubleshooters, and security. No exceptions, the directive came from the top, not HR, not a committee, not a pilot program, directly from Ellis Ward. There was no attempt to soften the edges. The memo used words like required, immediate, and non-negotiable. But what made it land with even more weight was the absence of justification. No motivational slogan, no HR-friendly rationale about team cohesion or empathy building. Just instructions, a schedule, and one final line at the bottom. Respect isn't optional, it's overdue. The reaction rippled across departments in waves. Some resisted, muttering quietly that it was a publicity stunt. Others whispered, it was a test. A few scoffed, saying their time was too valuable, but no one ignored it. The schedule was already posted outside the HR suite. Week 1 had names, times, PAIRINGS, in the tech wing. A lead developer named Lance blinked at his name beside cafeteria services 7 a.m. shift. He grumbled loudly, then quieted when he saw the name above his Ellis Ward, security loading dock. By the end of the day, everyone had checked the list. The message wasn't just logistically, it was cultural. The following Monday, the elevators opened earlier than usual. People who once strolled in at 9 were now clocking in before sunrise. Megan, the HR intern, arrived at 6:45 wearing sneakers and holding a clipboard. Her assignment was with maintenance inventory. She spent her morning sorting bleach bottles and checking mop handles for cracks. No one made a speech. No one asked how she was doing. She simply did the work. In the loading dock, Ellis stood beside Marvin, the night shift security guard, who had worked there for 14 years, without ever once meeting a member of the C-suite. Marvin explained the badge scanner quirks, the blind spot in the back hallway camera, and the small heater that buzzed whenever the door was left open. Ellis didn't take notes. He just listened. On Wednesday, Sarah was spotted at the mailroom, lifting boxes and logging deliveries. Her posture had changed. Less brisk, more observant. By Friday, something had shifted, not in grand gestures, but in smaller ones. More people nodded in hallways. The jokes got quieter, the eye rolls fewer. People began asking names instead of just job titles. It didn't fix everything, but it changed the tone. In a quiet moment in the break room, Tom poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to the custodian he'd never spoken to before, saying simply, "Thanks for always restocking the paper towels. I noticed." That same afternoon, a designer who once shared a meme mocking the janitor now posted a photo of her polishing brass elevator buttons beside a custodian captioned, "Respect is learned. I'm learning." No memo was sent to celebrate these things. Ellis didn't post a follow-up or call a company-wide meeting. He didn't need to. Old values had found a new place in the building, and no one could pretend they hadn't been told. The office hadn't changed much, even now. The same plain walls, the same windows facing the loading dock instead of the skyline, the same narrow desk without a nameplate. Ellis liked it that way deliberate, quiet, practical. But in the far corner, near the bookshelf, stood the one thing that always caught people off guard. A mop, not framed, not behind glass, not mounted like a symbol, just leaned against the wall, still worn at the bristles, still wrapped in faded tape around the base, the same one he'd carried through hallways, break rooms, stairwells, and service elevators for weeks. No plaque explained it, no spotlight shone on it. He never mentioned it, but people noticed. Some of the newer employees assumed it was a joke, some kind of corporate metaphor. They'd glance at it, then quickly look away. Others thought it was nostalgic, a humble beginnings prop. But those who had been there, those who remembered the weeks before the announcement, understood. It wasn't there for sentiment. It wasn't there for display. It was a boundary line, a quiet one. Never used it to make a point. He never pointed to it during meetings or explained it during interviews. But its presence asked a question, silently. Every time someone entered the room, how did you treat the man holding it? It reminded him of things he had no intention of forgetting. The jokes in elevators, the forwarded emails, the eye rolls, the raised voices over small inconveniences, the lack of eye contact. The conversations that stopped when he walked into a room. He hadn't needed reports to learn the company's culture. He had walked it, mopped it, emptied its bins, replaced its bulbs, and unclogged its toilets. He had watched how people behaved when they thought they were above someone, and now, in this room, that mop stood as witness. Some visitors glanced at it with discomfort, unsure if it was a test. Others asked about it directly. "Is that from the supply closet?" A consultant once asked, with a nervous laugh. Ellis had only said, "It's from the hallway outside the second-floor kitchenette." The consultant had stopped laughing. It wasn't a symbol of humility. It was a reminder of perception, because no one had questioned his presence when he wore the uniform. No one had wondered why a janitor was allowed access to executive floors or server rooms. No one had stopped to think why he lingered in meetings or asked quiet questions in break rooms, because in their eyes, he didn't matter. He wasn't watching. He was just background now. When someone sat across from him and tried to perform decency, the mop in the corner made it harder to pretend. Not because he'd ever bring it up, but because it was already there. It was there when promotions were reviewed, when terminations were considered, when culture reports were discussed. It stood in the corner during quiet pauses and long silences. When words failed and reputations began to crack, Ellis never wanted to forget how much people revealed when they believed you were beneath them. That mop wasn't a token. It wasn't about starting from the bottom. It was about what the bottom let him see. And now, in this room, in this chair, at this desk, he still saw it every day.